nobody's going to recognize the financial world we're living in once this unwinds. And it will unwind. Mathematically, it has to.
Hey friends, thanks so much for tuning in. You know how much it means to me and Bill Holter, who I have back on the line, and I've invited Bill back for a very important conversation about the economy and precious metals because, as y'all know, ever since the Nunes memo got released last Friday, and on that day the market tanked 666 points, to which Q asked, coincidence? I don't think it's a coincidence at all, and neither does Q. We know who owns and runs and controls these markets. Bill, welcome back. How are you?
Good, Sean. Thanks for having me.
Well, you're welcome. It does seem to me as though the deep state shadow government, seems to me they're sending a message. They control these markets. It's been down ever since that Nunes FISA memo was released, Bill.
Well, there's several theories. One being that the memo being a truth bomb, that there'd be more to follow, that there will be arrests, and that's what has caused the stock market to start unraveling. There's also a theory that after the State of the Union, as patriotic as that was, basically they're going to hang, the deep state is going to hang the stock market and hang all the problems around President Trump's neck. And it'll be easier to do because was taking credit for the Trump rally, which I had said many times, that's a really bad thing to do.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you there. The complicit media is going to try to hang all these problems on Trump, when those of us paying attention know that almost all of the problems go right back to the Clinton-Obama treachery. I mean, all of the problems. Right,
and we found that out. I mean, we've known it. We've had the pieces to put it all together. But now Uranium One is going to be investigated. Turns out that Obama not only knew, but wanted to be kept up to date, up to the minute as to what was going on with the spying.
Yeah, that's right. And
there's a couple other thoughts as far as why this big change in the market. One is the interest rates had gotten all the way on the 10-year, had gotten all the way to 2.85% or 2.88 actually, and it may be that's a line in the sand. Also, with the tax law was passed, it's going to create bigger deficits. And so you're talking about a $600 billion deficit. 600 billion additional bonds will be needed to be sold by the Treasury this year. At the same time, the Fed is or has actually tapered a little bit. In November and December, they did liquidate, I believe it was $40 or $50 billion worth of, they said, treasuries and MBS. And I would point out, think about what they put on their balance sheet. They put really crappy securities. For instance, they bought up some of the securities that the brokerage houses were trying to peddle them at 80, 90 cents on the dollar, and the best bid was 11 cents. So the Fed has bought all kinds of bad paper. Now, if they taper, the only thing they can sell are their better securities, the treasuries, basically. So if you've got a portfolio with both good and bad securities, and you sell the good, what are you left with? You're left with the bad.
Yeah, so I'll amend what I was saying earlier, too. It's not just Clinton and Obama. It's the Federal Reserve, right? The crux of the problem for decades and decades.
Right, right.
You know, we've got this budget bill that they passed, and I was at the club on the treadmill on Thursday night and saw Wolf Blitzer throw to the House Live, and Rand Paul was beseeching his colleagues to take a deep breath here and realize that nobody had read the 700-page budget bill. Nobody had read it, and they all wanted to vote on it, and he said no. And somehow between then and this conversation, they passed a budget bill. And you know what? It's just one more step towards the precipice. We're $20 trillion in debt, and nobody but Rand Paul seems to care. But I did find that ironic that CNN, Wolf Blitzer, on his show, threw to Rand Paul, which he would never, ever normally do. And honestly, it was 15 minutes of Rand Paul talking. And I was shocked because that's not something CNN cares about or wants to promote. But I think in lieu of actually discussing the Nunes memo or all the treason from the DNC, they're happy to give you a little Rand Paul as a sideshow.
Well, that's like Obamacare. We have to pass it to see what's in it. I mean,
yeah.
If you remember, Pelosi said that.
Yeah, 700 pages on this budget bill, and Rand Paul said, we got it last night at midnight, and nobody has read it. What are we voting on?
Right. A couple other things, Sean. It appears that Moody's is threatening to downgrade U.S. credit. And also, out early this morning, it has been announced that China will be trading oil for yuan beginning March 26th. And that came from official sources within China. So that's a big game changer. I mean, that's a real shot at the dollar.
Well, there's a lot going on, and as you know, recently 6 traders were arrested for futures spoofing the gold and silver markets. So I want to talk about what we're seeing as a real sea change, because there's a new sheriff in town. His name is President Donald Trump. And I don't think under a Hillary Clinton presidency, the CFTC and the FBI and I think it was the DOJ would have worked together to arrest those traders for the spoofing of the precious metals markets. That's my opinion. So I do think that there's a new sheriff in town. We can talk about that. But let's just stay on this market for a minute. This is Mike Maloney, who warned everybody a few weeks back when the VIX was at pretty much an all-time low, while the stock market was reaching new highs every day, and sentiment said that nobody was worried. Here's what Maloney said about that.
This is insane. It can't last. Something is going to break.
This is insane. It can't last. Something's going to break. I sort of stepped on that line. But boy, was he right, and something has broken. So my question, really coming full circle here, Bill, is this all a message to Trump about who controls the markets, or is this a genuine change and, it's just the end of the Fed being able to prop this thing up?
Well, there definitely is a change. I mean, obviously, we can't know one way or the other whether this is the deep state pulling the plug and hanging the blame on Trump. But we do see a couple things going on. It does look for the first time in years and years and years, there's a little hook at the bottom of the velocity chart. And velocity's done nothing but go down since I think around 1999 or 2000. I can send you a chart on that. And also, interbank lending has absolutely crashed in the last month. It's down to $13 billion net interbank lending. That goes back to levels of, 40 years ago. So there definitely is something going on in the credit markets. And as I've told you all along, everything relies on credit and credit relies on confidence. If there's a shakeup going on behind the scenes in the credit markets, then this will be an unwind of 50 years or more of built-up credit.
Yeah, another Lehman event. The VIX did spike overnight the other day to one of those climactic peaks that we've only seen, during the 2008 crash, when famously, by the way, Representative Paul Konjarsky came on C-SPAN and said there was an electronic run on the banks to the tune of $550 billion, and if the Fed hadn't closed the window...
If they had not done that, their estimation was that by 2 o'clock that afternoon, $5.5 trillion would have been drawn out of the money market system of the United States, would have collapsed the entire economy of the United States, and within 24 hours, the world economy would have collapsed.
Now, that's what I'm talking about here when I say the powers that be, the banksters, are sending Trump a message, taking the Dow down 666 points last Friday. I'm saying they can do it. They have done it. I think it's very quantifiable that they did it in 2000. I guess it was 2009. I don't recall. I think it was 2009 because wasn't that when the S&P hit its
It
historic
went down
low at
six.
666?
Right.
They love that number.
Yes.
So I just think there's more going on here. I mean, as everybody knows, our listeners are so educated. We're not breaking any news here. The banksters control the markets. They've taken it up to 25, 26,000 on the Dow. If they want to take it down to 15,000, they can do it.
Well, Sean, before this is over, the spike that we just saw in the VIX is going to look like a little blip. I mean, the real spike is in front of us.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that needs to be said is if you look at Venezuela, the Venezuelan stock market, they hit hyperinflation, was the world's best performing stock market.
It's basically people getting currency out of fixed income, if you will, out of banks, out of bonds. You're seeing yields globally go up. And yields going up at the same time, the world has never been as indebted as it is right now.
Well, nor is our country. And so let's talk about this budget bill and interest rates. If they're adding another, I don't even know what the figure is. I think Rand Paul said this is an additional $600 billion in spending on top of all the debt-based spending this country does every year anyway. What happens if interest rates start to rise, Bill? They are rising. I mean, what happens if they go to any sort of nominal historic norm? What happens if interest rates go to 4%, 5%?
They can't. I mean, the system can't function with 4 or 5% rates, not with the amount of debt that's outstanding now. And that's what it looks like, is that there is a line in the sand, and it may be this 285 level where things started to blow up. And Sean, I do want to mention, and I don't talk too much about individual trading daily, but what we've seen this week is we've seen tremendous volatility, and this sequence is not going to end on a day that the market opens up in the morning. It will end when the market panics in the morning and ends higher for the day. And what we saw yesterday, I guess the Dow was up 300-400 points and closed down 1,000 points. Now this morning, I think the Dow was up 250-300 points, and it's 11 a.m. in the morning or 11:30, and we just looked at Dow's down 300 points. So to see the market open up early, don't breathe a sigh of relief, because that's not going to be your low day. We're not going to. If you look at panics in the past, that's not the way they're ended.
Yeah. Well, it's just, it elicits all sorts of memories of these other down markets we've had. I mean, the plummet that took us down to that S&P low of 666 was bad, and it took a long time. I mean, one never knows how long these things are going to go and how low they're going to go. Calling a bottom on this market is just as hard as calling a top. If the market begins to crash in earnest, I mean, we know how propped up it's been. If it begins to crash quickly, there's no telling how low it could go. So obviously that could get scary. What are you seeing in the gold markets, Bill? Are you seeing any action in the gold markets you want to share?
Yeah, people were pretty disheartened this week that gold and silver were weak. And it's being portrayed as not the place to go. But what's actually happened is the open interest, until yesterday, the open interest every single day was actually higher when you included the amount of EFPs, which are exchange for physical contracts. Those are the longs that stand for delivery, and they're being rerouted from COMEX over to London to get their metal. And the numbers so far for the year, there have been 872 tons of gold routed through these EFPs. Now, the world only produces 2,400 tons per year. So that's more than a third of global mine production in 5 weeks. What I'm telling you is there is real physical demand, and the open interest, the total open interest and EFPs combined have risen. So that tells you there's more contracts outstanding, price has gone down. Those contracts were short sales to open. They were not long liquidations.
Okay. Well, again, it brings me to the idea of Jeff Christian saying that there is no such thing as a manipulated precious metals market. Not so much what you're saying, but just sort of getting back to what I was saying here about these 6 traders arrested in a futures spoofing probe. And guess which banks they work for, Bill? UBS, HSBC, and Deutsche Bank. The same names, and of course, should be JP Morgan in there, but they don't ever pay for their crimes.
That's small potatoes. Spoofing is nothing. All they have to do, and I've said this on your show, I've written it a dozen times. All they have to do is pull a time and sales. For instance, I think it was Friday or Monday, there were 14,000 contracts sold right at 8:30. I guess it was last Friday on the non-farm payroll numbers. Nobody has 14,000 contracts. That's 1.4 million ounces of gold. And if a trader did have that position, there's no way he'd sell it in 2 minutes or 5 minutes to ensure that he gets the worst possible price he could, because he stepped on the market. So all they have to do is a time and sales, find out who sold it, where it came from, and you could find the perpetrator.
Right.
That's the real meat and potatoes.
Right, but they did. They found the perpetrators, and for the first time, we've seen enforcement by the U.S. It says right here in the Zero Hedge article, the enforcement action by the U.S. derivatives regulator was said to be the result of multi-agency investigation that also involved the DOJ and the FBI, the first of its kind for the CFTC. So I'm glad they arrested them. I mean, it's a lot better than a petty fine.
Well, it's $45 million. That to these banks is not even a ham sandwich. My point being, those traders that were spoofing, there's a difference between spoofing, trying to push the market $1 or $2 or whatever, and selling 1 million or 2 million paper ounces of gold in a concentrated 2-minute period of time.
Right.
There's a big difference between what used to move gold $30 or $40 and spoofing, which might move it 50 cents or $1.
Right. Well, and the big picture to keep in mind is that the price is still set, twice a day with the electronic fix in the city of London. So at what point, honestly, we've been having this conversation for so long, we feel like a broken record. At what point, if ever, will gold and silver trade as freely as they should?
That's a simple answer. The answer is when there's a failure to deliver. And there is going to be a failure to deliver. I mean, if you have 100 or 250 or 500 paper ounces represented or representing real gold that are not real gold, and you have a credit event, which it looks like we're moving into a credit event, then people are going to say, hey, I want my metal. And that metal simply does not exist. So, I mean, you theoretically could have COMEX go to $10 an ounce on gold offered and no bids, and you could have real gold at $5,000 bid at $5,000 and nothing offered. In other words, in an event where the cash call, the delivery is demanded, and the gold doesn't exist, nobody's going to sell their physical gold. You won't be able to buy your physical gold.
Well, guess who agrees with you about President Trump and this global economy and the U.S. economy specifically? Peter Schiff says President Trump has taken full ownership of the current bubble economy, and in doing so, he's setting himself up as the fall guy when things turn sour. Peter says he's so caught up in this bubble now in the stock market, he's branded it. The stock market has a big T on it for Trump, like one of his buildings, and I would add to that a T branded on it like ticking time bomb.
Right. Yeah, I've said all along it was a huge mistake. The first time he started talking about the stock market, that's the worst thing a president or really any politician can do that's in office, because when the market pulls back, if they're taking credit for it going up, they're going to end up getting blamed for it when it goes down.
Yeah, and I want to give a shout out here to Dan Kurtz over at DK Analytics. I hear from Dan via email quite often. He's a good guy, and he's actually mentioned in this article. It says Dan Kurtz at DK Analytics provided a pretty good breakdown of some key issues where the positive talk doesn't line up with what's actually going on. Number one, what used to be an ugly stock market bubble that would be pricked by higher interest rates, according to candidate Trump, is now proof that President Trump is doing a great job. He does tend to take ownership of all the good things, but there are a heck of a lot of bad things to which the ownership belongs rightfully to the treacherous DNC Clinton-Obama traitors.
Sean, I know the article you're talking about. Dan Kurtz wrote a really good article. We posted it, I think it was yesterday or the day before, and you might want to put a link up to it. It was a good article. And before we end, I do want to say nobody knows whether this is it. This is the beginning of the unwind. I suspect it is, but we do know what the ending is, and the ending is it'll be a total unwind of credit. Nobody's going to recognize the financial world we're living in once this unwinds. And it will unwind. Mathematically, it has to.
Well, here we sit in 2018, and you know what cover of what magazine we've been talking about for a very long time, the cover of the magazine on The Economist that predicted 30 years ago a world currency. And if you read the article, it says, get ready for it. When it comes, it'll be called the Phoenix. Embrace it. I mean,
well, the only way that can occur, Sean, is if everything gets leveled.
Right.
I mean, everything needs to be wiped out for the population to basically beg for a one world currency. That's the only way that it can come about.
That's right. And you know what? I want to say one last thing before we part ways here. If you've been watching the crypto space over the past month or two, well, specifically the last 3 or 4 weeks, the last 2 weeks, it's been a real bloodbath. I think things are stabilizing now and turning up. As you know, frequently we see this happen with Bitcoin in the first part of a year. Just look at the charts. That this happens frequently with Bitcoin. But sentiment, when it changes quickly, and when things crash, they can crash hard, and people panic. And we ain't seen nothing yet as it pertains to the stock market. If the stock market starts to do what the cryptos have done recently, we're in for some fireworks.
Well, Sean, you could see Bitcoin go to whatever number, pick a number, 50,000, 100,000. The bottom line, in my opinion, when all is said and done, it's digital air.
It's a speculation, Bill. To own any of the cryptos, I think at this point is, I think, smart to speculate on the possibility that Cliff High might be right and we might be seeing $100,000 Bitcoin parties this summer. That's what he says.
You might be interested. I saw a video last night. Andy Hoffman came out and said he sold the last of his gold. He's 100% Bitcoin.
Oh, well, I hadn't seen that. Well, he'll certainly be doing cartwheels if Cliff High proves to be right and Bitcoin hits 40,000 or 100,000 at some point in 2018.
But think about from a standpoint of you're saying it's a speculation. My opinion is it's digital air, and if you go 100% into Bitcoin or a cryptocurrency and have zero gold, zero silver, and we have a credit breakdown, and let's say, God forbid, a war, EMP, whatever, and infrastructure starts to break down. Plenty of the arguments, how are you going to trade Bitcoin?
Well, you know as well as I do that investing 101, the first class you would take as a freshman, if you're even going to talk about this, would be never, ever go all in on anything. You have to have diversification if you want to survive. If you want to play with the big boys, you generally don't want to go all in on anything for very darn long, if at all, if ever.
Well, Sean, one of the biggest laughs I had, this was probably back in November, maybe early December. I was on the phone with Jim, and he told me he was reading an article that Bitcoin was going to be approved for retirement plans. Mm-hmm. And I just, we had a chuckle. Imagining you're filling up a retirement plan with what our opinion is digital air. It's not real.
Yeah, well, the same could be said.
I'm sure the trolls will go wild, but we'll see. We'll see when all is said and done.
Well, it's a brave new world, and here's the thing. The last thing I'll say about cryptos is the Federal Reserve itself is working on FedCoin. So there's definitely more to this narrative than we know so far.
I've said that from day one, is that I absolutely believe these central banks are going to go and move their currencies into the crypto world. Crypto dollars, crypto euros, crypto rubles, whatever, because it does allow the powers that be to track every single transaction.
Yeah, and to try to roll this system forward.
Right down to the lemonade stand.
Yeah.
Everything will be tracked.
Well, that actually is a callback to the interview I just did with Deborah Tavares specifically. That is part of the beast system that they're rolling out. Literally, the Internet of Things, and they want to track everything on planet Earth, including you, your clothing, every purchase you make, your pets, your pet food, your kids, all of it. And it's a very, very scary, brave new world. It's a beast system is what it is. And I think that the only thing we can do is gird our loins and put on our spiritual armor, Bill.
The second coming can't come soon enough.
Amen. All right, Bill. Well, you know how much we appreciate talking with you. We get to catch up with you, it seems, every 4 to 6 weeks, and it's always a pleasure. So shout out the website where people can follow you, will you?
It's www.jsmindset, MINESET.com.
All right, very good. That's jsmindset.com. Our guest has been Bill Holter. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Sean.
All right, and guys, thank you so much for tuning in. We appreciate your support at sgtreport.com, thephaser.com, and thelibertymill.com. Real news 24/7. Have a wonderful week ahead. God bless.
Gordy Rose talks about things like H.P. Lovecraft and the return of the great old ones, and that we need to prepare our AI for the return of these great old ones. He talks about accessing with his computer 2 to the 500th power of parallel dimensions. He talks about reaching into these. He says if we're smart enough and clever enough, we can access these parallel dimensions and extract resources from there and bring those resources back into our world. This is all dark arts. This is all alchemy.